This year in the SEC more than ever, there is a pretty clearly defined line of haves and have-nots.
Yes.
I think once you get past Auburn, let's say, on that list, I think everyone else is very mediocre to below. And I think there's a separate group, Vanderbilt, sorry Vandy fans that are around, Vandy being dead last in that equation, right? And then
That's
above.
That's what we know for sure.
Well, and maybe South Carolina is sort of in the Vandy discussion too at the bottom of the league. But then after that, I think you could take Missouri, Mississippi State, Tennessee, a lot of these teams, and just roll them all out, and you don't know what's going to happen when they play each other.
We also, it sounds very strange to have this discussion. We don't know if Kentucky is in that second-tier group or not, based on last week with UTC, right? That was odd to see the way they started the season, to have UTC show up, and you look at the stat sheet, and it was not lopsided. It's not like it was some fluke that they were in that game with a couple turnovers or something. They competed against Kentucky. I still like Kentucky's offense a lot. I like Will Levis a lot. And their defense has always been their strong suit. Can they compete for that second spot in the SEC East with Florida? That's what we were talking about 10 days ago. We're not talking about it as much today.
Well, we just talked about it, Jill, when you brought up Nebraska last week. Winning in a loss and losing in a win. Nebraska won in a loss to Oklahoma, and I can't think of a team last week that did more damage in a win to their reputation than Kentucky.
Yeah.
Because the problem with Kentucky in that game, it wasn't some fluky 4-interception game where they're hanging around for that reason. Chattanooga ran the ball well against them, and they stopped Chris Rodriguez in that Kentucky rushing attack. That's concerning. The fact that Chattanooga was pushing you around a little bit up front on both lines of scrimmage, that's a problem for Kentucky. I have a different perspective on Kentucky after that game. I still think Will Levis is the real deal. I think he's a good quarterback. I think Kentucky has some chances to do some things in the SEC East. But overall, that was a bad week for the Wildcats, and it has me thinking less of them at this point.
And the team that we thought was Tier 2 that they're not is LSU. They've dropped the most to me, Chad, based on preseason perception, Jill, versus where they are today. I just don't buy them at all like I did prior to week 1.
And it's confusing too, right? Because you look at some of the defensive players,
right?
Stingley, top
secondary.
of the list. Their entire secondary. These
teams are throwing the football against them.
These are first and second round NFL draft picks. Their game today, we're going to cover this in our picks a little bit later. Their game today against Mississippi State, where it looked like Mike Leach invented the crossing route a year ago, and that Bo Pelini, as defensive coordinator, had never heard of a crossing route in that game as they destroyed LSU down in Baton Rouge. Chance at revenge in that game. New defensive coordinator now, Bo Pelini's out. Can LSU adjust? This is a big moment. Mississippi State coming off getting screwed at Memphis. Chance against LSU. I'll be watching that one.
That game was so surprising to me. So, I spent 9 years in the Pac-12, and Mike Leach, his offense hasn't changed. Like, they do the same thing over and over and over again. Justin Wilcox at Cal, the Washington Huskies, they had it figured out. All LSU had to do was go watch that game film and see what they did. And it was just like you guys were saying. It was a brand new offense.
Well,
it was like it's inexcusable to have all of that pass out there and not be able to execute on anything.
Well, so you knew Mike Leach from Pac-12 at Washington State, as you said. It's remarkable that a guy who is so unpredictable in what he's going to say in a quote, his teams are so predictable. And it's amazing because he's been the head coach at 3 also-ran Power 5 programs. Yep. Texas Tech, total outpost in West Texas, not known for a history of winning. Washington State, same thing up in the Palouse. And Mississippi State, historically, is the second worst SEC program in terms of wins and losses, just ahead of Vanderbilt. He goes to these places, his teams will always surprise someone, and then they're always going to be surprised at some point, and they're going to get blown out because the system doesn't work. And then every third or fourth year, he is going to have a season where they go 4-8 or 3-9 because he's got a quarterback who can't stop throwing interceptions. This is the pattern of Mike Leach that will continue to repeat itself. But in that pattern, guys, you're going to get something great along the way. You're going to get a special 10-2 type season that no one saw coming.
You're also going to get some great quotes, as you mentioned.
Yes.
I think so. Mike Leach used to call me his favorite reporter. He would tell other people this. And I don't know how people perceived that, but I do think that I could pinpoint what that went back to. So I would go to my producer and for our pregame interview, and I said, all right, we're all in agreement that Mike Leach isn't going to tell us anything, right? Like, he's not going to talk football. And he's like, carry on. We know this. And so Oregon had Lewis and Clark throwback uniforms. That was a real thing that the Oregon Ducks decided this is going to happen on a college football Saturday. We're going to have Lewis and Clark throwback uniforms. So I said, let me just ask Mike Leach about Lewis and Clark. So I get through 2 football questions, which of course he doesn't say anything about. He gives me a 3-paragraph response to Lewis and Clark, and he would not stop talking. And I just kept going like, yep, all right, this is it. And from that point on, he was like, you're pretty cool.
Lewis and Clark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like you.
Exploration.
You know all about Lewis and Clark.
And he got into Sacagawea and the whole deal. Like, it was a whole diatribe. It's still out there on the internet. I'll try and
We
post
should play
it.
during a break.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
I look forward to the William Penn throwback uniforms
Yes.
Penn State will wear, and then maybe that'll lead to some great James Franklin quotes about the history of William Penn and the state of Pennsylvania.
Mike Leach can talk for 2 hours intelligently about any subject that you throw out there. I am convinced of it.
He is well read.
Yeah.
You can always tell the coaches, the people you interview that are well read, that have an opinion on everything, and he's one of those guys.
Chad, imagine if he takes the Tennessee job. If they don't fire John Curry, if they don't call the plane back from the West Coast, if John Curry, if he does answer his cell phone and they know exactly where he was going that day that he met Mike Leach for the interview. Imagine if Leach was the head coach of the Vols.
That whole experience, that whole coaching search, starting with Shiano Sunday, was such a train wreck and disaster. I remember when he flew to the West Coast, John Curry I'm talking about, to meet with Mike Leach in Los Angeles. And I believe they met at a park bench.
Yes.
Remember that the
Yes.
texts were leaked. And you could see Mike Leach going, it's like,
The
beautiful,
play-by-play.
it's a big orange sunrise or whatever he said. And they're meeting at a park. I remember thinking that night, I went to bed excited. I'm thinking of all the twists and turns and bad. If Tennessee ends up with Mike Leach, this feels like a home run. But also knowing that Mike Leach at a job like Tennessee that has so many people covering that program in that scope would be a true sight to behold.
A true Lewis and Clark exploration was that coaching search.
Glory, glory, hallelujah, if you could get those quotes and that coverage with Mike Leach in Knoxville. He would know everything about Davy Crockett.
He already
He would
does.
go through the
He
history.
does.
Okay.
I can
Can you
confirm
imagine
this.
every press conference would have some tie into Davy Crockett at Tennessee? It'd be great. It'd be entertaining.
One thing about Mississippi State that ties into Tennessee, I think for Tennessee to have success this season in their SEC slate, Jill, they have to find some pace that goes along with their up-tempo style. Pace meaning pace can also include slow it down a bit and possess the football for 4 or 5 minutes. You're allowed to do that in the SEC. I think it's imperative that you control the clock some in the SEC. That goes back to Mississippi State. They have to be able to run the football, right? They can't do that. So what are they week to week? It's Chad, I was nodding with you whenever you were saying like some years it's 10 wins, some years it's 3, because there's no consistency with the quarterback position, and the quarterback is adequate, right? I mean, it's nothing that we think that Mississippi State is going to pull the upset like we did maybe last year after week 1 when they played LSU.
Well, and I think always the question with Leach comes down to, look, the question with every head coach, it's going to come down to recruiting, right, in a lot of ways. And for Leach, recruiting to his system and getting the guys that he needs, I think is so important in what he wants to do. And then the question was always, can that offense win in the SEC at the highest level?
Right.
And, I think we're starting to get some answers to that, but the verdict is still very much out.